The alien girl was hiding in my cabin. I found out too late why she was hiding. Susan woke up to strange noises coming from her kitchen. She lived alone in a small cabin deep in the Montana woods far from the nearest town. The sound of metal clanging against metal made her reach for the baseball bat she kept beside her bed. She crept down the hallway, her heart pounding with each step. When she peered around the corner, Susan froze. A tall, slender figure stood at her sink. The stranger had pale, blue skin that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight coming through the window. Her hair flowed like liquid silver down her back and her ears came to delicate points. The alien girl turned suddenly, her large almond-shaped eyes widening in alarm. She held up her six-fingered hands, showing she had no weapon. Susan gripped the bat tighter. "What are you doing in my house?" The alien spoke, her voice melodic yet strained. "I need shelter, they hunt me." "Who hunts you?" Susan asked, keeping her distance. "Collectors. They take my kind for study. My ship crashed 3 days ago. They tracked me here to your planet." Susan lowered the bat slightly but remained cautious. "How did you find my cabin?" The alien gestured to her wrist where a device pulsed with soft light. "Your dwelling is isolated. I hope to remain undetected until my rescue team arrives." She paused. "I am Liani." Susan introduced herself, still processing that she was talking to an actual alien. She offered Liani food and water, which the alien accepted, gratefully. Over a simple meal of soup and bread, Liani explained that her people, the Navari, had been observing Earth for decades. Their advanced civilization existed in a star system 60 light-years away. "They find your species fascinating," Liani said. "How you overcome your limitations through determination alone." She took another spoonful of soup. "Your food is interesting. The flavors are so bold compared to Navari cuisine." Susan sat across from her visitor, studying the alien woman. Her movements were fluid, almost like she was moving underwater. The blue of her skin shifted slightly, with her emotions growing deeper when she spoke of home. "Why would these collectors hunt you?" Susan finally asked. "You said they want to study your kind. But why?" Liani set down her spoon. "Our biology holds secrets," she explained. "Our cellular structure can regenerate completely. We live for centuries. Our DNA contains elements unknown in your galaxy." She looked down. "Our bodies are valuable to those who would exploit us, so they want to." "What experiment on you?" Susan felt a chill run down her spine. "Worse," Liani said. "Harvest collectors take what they need and discard the rest. They operate outside galactic law, preying on less advanced worlds or isolated individuals." She gestured to herself, "Like me." Susan pushed away from the table. "I should call someone. The police or the military or..." "No." Liani stood quickly, her eyes wide with panic. "Your authorities cannot help. They would only alert others to my presence. Your government would likely contain me for study as well." Susan paused, realizing the truth in those words. She had seen enough movies to know how governments typically responded to alien visitors, especially ones with valuable biology. "Where is your rescue team?" Susan asked. "How long until they arrive?" Liani touched her wrist device. 5 of your Earth days, perhaps 6. The crash damaged my beacon. Its signal is weak." Susan nodded decisively. "You can stay here until then. We need to keep you hidden, though I have neighbors about 2 miles down the road. They sometimes hike this way." "Thank you," Liani said, her voice soft with relief. "The collectors will not stop searching. I must warn you, helping me puts you at risk." Susan smiled slightly. "I live alone in the woods because I like my privacy and don't mind risk." The alien could stay in the spare bedroom. She decided she would need to go to town tomorrow for extra supplies, but otherwise they could lay low. That night, Susan lay awake, staring at her ceiling. A real alien was sleeping in her guest room. She tried to process everything Liani had told her about the Navari. Their world, Kalaya, was mostly ocean, with floating cities built on massive lily pad-like structures. They had achieved space travel thousands of years ago and had been observing Earth since humans first developed radio technology. The Navari were peaceful explorers, but their unique biology made them targets. Their cells could regenerate damaged tissue instantly, and they lived for centuries. Their blood contained elements that could cure many diseases. Their society was built around art, science, and exploration. With no concept of war, Susan wondered if she should be more afraid. Instead, she felt oddly calm, like something inevitable had happened, something she had been waiting for without knowing it. The next morning, Susan woke to the smell of something burning. She rushed to the kitchen to find Liani attempting to cook eggs. The alien looked embarrassed. "I wish to prepare nutrition as thanks," she explained. "I observed you yesterday, but the heating element is more powerful than I anticipated." Susan laughed and showed her how to properly use the stove. As they ate, Liani asked countless questions about human life, clearly fascinated by even the most mundane details. "Your species is so varied," Liani said. "We never have little physical variation. I have never seen beings with such diversity of appearance and culture." Susan explained she needed to go to town for supplies while she was gone. Liani should stay inside away from windows. The alien agreed, promising to remain hidden. The drive to town gave Susan time to think. She made a mental list of things they would need for 5 days. Food, medical supplies just in case, and maybe some different clothes for Liani. The alien woman was wearing some kind of jumpsuit made of material that seemed to shift like liquid metal. But Susan thought some normal clothes might help her blend in if anyone happened to stop by at the small general store. Susan filled her cart, trying not to appear suspicious. The elderly cashier raised her eyebrows at the amount of food. "Having a party up at your place?" asked as she rang up the items. "Just some friends visiting." Susan lied smoothly. "They love the wilderness. Be careful with those campfires," warned. "It's been dry lately." Susan assured her they would be careful. On her way out, she noticed a black SUV parked across the street. 2 men in dark suits stood beside it, watching the town. They seemed out of place in the small Montana community. Something about them made Susan uneasy. She loaded her groceries quickly and drove away, checking her rearview mirror to make sure she wasn't followed. The road to her cabin was unmarked and difficult to find if you didn't know the way. She took extra precautions, making a few random turns before heading home. When she arrived, Liani was sitting cross-legged in the living room. Her eyes were closed, and she seemed to be floating several inches above the floor. Her silver hair moved as if underwater despite the lack of breeze. Susan gasped in surprise, dropping a bag of groceries. The sound broke Liani from her trance, and she gently lowered to the floor. "Forgive me," the alien said. "I was meditating. It helps conserve energy and heal minor injuries from the crash you were floating," Susan said, still staring. Liani tilted her head. "Yes, the energy field we generate can be manipulated to overcome your planet's gravity. It requires concentration, though." Susan shook her head and started putting away groceries. "There were men in town," she said after a moment. "They seemed strange, out of place." Liani stood immediately, her expression anxious. "Describe them." "Dark suits, black vehicle, very official-looking," Susan replied. "Not local." "Definitely. Collectors have human allies," Liani explained. "They pay well for information or assistance." That evening they sat by the fireplace. Liani explained more about the galaxy beyond Earth. There were 12 major spacefaring civilizations with hundreds of smaller ones. The Navari were among the oldest but not the most powerful. A coalition called the Assembly maintained peace, though frontier regions still faced dangers from pirates, collectors, and other outlaws. Earth is what we call a threshold world, Liani said. "You have the technology to join galactic society soon, but lack the necessary unity. Your weapons development has outpaced your social development." Susan frowned. "So we're too dangerous." "Not dangerous," Liani corrected. "Unpredictable. The Assembly prefers to wait until a species achieves global cooperation before formal contact. Many believe humans are too divided to join without causing disruption. But you're here now," Susan pointed out. "Observation only," Liani explained. "And my presence is accidental. My ship malfunctioned during a routine survey." She looked into the fire. "We have been watching your progress for centuries. Some of us believe your species shows great promise. Others see only your capacity for destruction." Susan was about to respond when Liana's wrist device began to pulse rapidly. The alien jumped to her feet, her eyes wide with fear. "They found me," she whispered. Before Susan could respond, a deafening hum filled the air. The cabin walls vibrated. A blinding light swept through the windows, illuminating the room in harsh white beams. "Stay inside," Liani commanded, rushing to the door. Susan grabbed her arm. "Wait, what are you doing facing them alone? They will destroy your home, otherwise your whole forest to capture me." Susan peeked through the curtains and gasped. A massive dark ship hovered above the clearing, its underside covered in pulsing red lights. 3 figures descended from it, their bodies encased in mechanical suits that made them look more machine than living being. Each stood nearly 7 feet tall, with multiple appendages extending from their armored frames. Liani stepped onto the porch. Her slender form appeared fragile against the looming threat. Her silver hair whipped around her face in the wind created by the hovering ship. The leader of the collectors spoke, its voice distorted. "You have led us on quite a chase, little Navari. Your organs will fetch an excellent price." Susan watched in horror as one collector raised a weapon. The air crackled with energy. Liani dodged the first blast, but the second caught her shoulder. She fell to one knee, blue blood shimmering like liquid sapphire. Where the blast had torn her clothing, something snapped inside Susan. She grabbed her shotgun from the cabinet near the door and ran outside, positioning herself between Liani and the collectors. "Leave her alone," she shouted. The weapon felt heavy in her hands, but her grip was steady. The collectors hesitated, clearly surprised by her intervention. "You would defend an alien creature you barely know?" the leader asked, its synthesized voice containing a note of curiosity. "She is my friend," Susan replied, keeping the gun steady. Her hands shook, but her aim remained true. The leader stepped forward. "Your primitive weapon cannot harm our exosuits, human. Step aside, and we will spare your life. We have no quarrel with your kind." Susan fired anyway. The blast ricocheted off the suit, but the force pushed the collector back several steps. The being regained its balance quickly, its helmet tilting as if reassessing the situation. Liani rose to her feet, whispering, "Something you should know about humans. They protect what they care about regardless of the odds." The collector to the right began moving in a wide arc, attempting to flank them. Susan pivoted, keeping her weapon trained on the leader, but aware of the other's movements. "Brave but foolish," the leader said. "You cannot win this encounter." "Human, maybe not," Susan agreed, "but I'm going to make you work for it." She fired again this time, aiming for the joints in the exosuit where the armor appeared thinner. The shot connected with more effect this time. The leader staggered, one of its mechanical arms sparking and hanging. Limp Liani suddenly pressed something into Susan's hand, a small crystal that pulsed with inner light. "Hold this," she whispered. Before Susan could ask what it was, Liani stepped forward, raising her arms. The air around her began to shimmer like heat waves rising from hot pavement. Her silver hair lifted as if underwater, and her eyes glowed with inner light. The collectors backed up slightly. "Ah," said the leader. "So the rumors of Navari abilities are true. Most impressive." Susan felt the crystal warming in her palm. It vibrated slightly, sending tingling sensations up her arm. Liani began to speak in her native language. The sounds were like water flowing over stones, beautiful but incomprehensible to Susan. The crystal in her hand pulsed in rhythm with the words. The collectors raised their weapons, but before they could fire, a high-pitched tone cut through the air. A bright light appeared in the sky, growing larger by the second. The collectors looked up, their body language showing alarm. "Navari battlecruiser," the leader hissed. "We must retreat," as the collectors scrambled back to their ship. Susan heard Liani laugh softly. "Next time choose easier prey." The collector's ship vanished, just as an elegant vessel descended. Its design was nothing like the dark, angular ship of the collectors. This craft was sleek with curves that reminded Susan of ocean waves. It settled gently in the clearing, bathing everything in soft blue light. A door opened in its side and several figures emerged. They were clearly Navari like Liani, but dressed in what appeared to be ceremonial armor. Their blue skin varied in shade from pale ice to deep ocean. Their movements were graceful as they approached the tallest. Among them, a female with elaborate markings on her face stepped forward. "Liani," she said, warmth evident in her voice even through the formal tone. "We feared the worst when your beacon went silent. I owe my survival to this human." Liani gestured to Susan. "The collectors found me, but she stood against them without hesitation." The tall Navari turned to Susan, studying her with large, iridescent eyes. "I am Commander Elea of the Navari Exploration Fleet," she said. "You have our deepest gratitude, human." Susan, few would risk themselves for a stranger, especially one not of their world. Susan shrugged. She needed help. That seemed more important than where she came from, Commander. Elea tilted her head slightly, a gesture that reminded Susan of a curious bird. The movement was elegant yet alien. "You speak with wisdom beyond your years, too." Navari medics approached Liani, examining her wounded shoulder. The injury was already healing, the edges of the burn knitting together before Susan's eyes. "Is that normal?" Susan asked, gesturing to the rapidly healing wound. Liani nodded. "Our cellular regeneration is quite efficient for most injuries. It is part of why collectors value our biology, Commander." Elea studied their surroundings. "The collectors will return," she said. "They are persistent when valuable prey escapes." She turned to Liani. "You must return with us immediately." Liani looked at Susan, hesitation clear in her expression. "I cannot leave yet," she said. "There is much I must explain to Susan. Her human allies may be in danger now." Elea considered this. "We cannot remain here long. Our presence violates observation protocols. Perhaps Susan could accompany us?" Liani suggested. "She has earned sanctuary, and she may no longer be safe here." Susan blinked, surprised. By the suggestion, leave Earth, Elea seemed equally surprised. "You propose bringing a human to Kalaya. This is unprecedented. I propose bringing this human." Liani corrected. "She has proven herself worthy of our trust, and the Assembly has discussed making contact with Earth soon. This could be an opportunity to assess human readiness." "One of the other," Navari stepped forward. "This one male with darker blue skin. Captain, we cannot simply take a human from their world. There are protocols." Susan listened to them debate, feeling increasingly like she was witnessing something historic. She also realized that her quiet life in the woods had just been completely upended. Whether she went with them or stayed, the collectors now knew where she lived, Commander. Elea finally raised a hand, silencing the discussion. "We will bring the human to the ship for now. A decision can be made in orbit." She turned to Susan. "You may gather some possessions. Our departure must be swift." Susan rushed back to her cabin, grabbing a backpack. She threw in some clothes, toiletries, and a few personal items. Her hands shook as she moved around the familiar space, knowing she might not return. She grabbed a photo of her parents, now both gone, and her journal. Then, as an afterthought, she took the small wooden box that contained her mother's jewelry. Outside, the Navari were preparing to board, their movements efficient and coordinated. Liani came to her side. "Are you certain of this?" she asked. Susan looked at her cabin at the forest. That had been her home for years. She'd felt like she was waiting for something. More life purpose, meaning. Now it seemed the universe had answered in the most unexpected way. "I am," she said, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. The interior of the Navari ship was nothing like Susan had imagined from science fiction movies. Instead of cold metal and blinking lights, it was organic. Surfaces curved gently, glowing with soft light. The walls seemed almost alive, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. The air smelled fresh with hints of something like ocean spray. Liani led her to what appeared to be a medical bay, where several Navari examined her with curious but respectful attention. They scanned her with handheld devices and asked permission to take small samples of hair and blood. Susan agreed, finding their careful approach reassuring. Meanwhile, Liani received treatment for her injury and changed into fresh clothing, a flowing garment that shimmered with subtle patterns. When she returned, she found Susan staring out a viewport at the earth below. "It's beautiful from up here," Susan whispered. "The blue oceans, the swirls of white clouds, the green and brown of land. It looks so peaceful. Many worlds appear peaceful from orbit, Liani said, joining her yet hold conflict beneath the clouds. She placed a hand gently on Susan's shoulder. You have left your home because of me. I will ensure your safe return if that is your wish. Susan turned to her. I don't know what I wish yet. Everything has happened so fast. But I don't regret helping you. Commander Alea entered the chamber, her tall form commanding attention without effort. The collector's ship has been detected leaving your solar system, she informed them. But we have intercepted communications. They have reported finding a Navari on Earth. She looked at Susan with something like sympathy. Your world may soon face unwelcome attention. What does that mean? Susan asked. It means, Liani explained, that other species may come to investigate Earth. Has been under observation only. Now it may become a target for those seeking resources or biological specimens like the collector's commander. Alea nodded gravely. The assembly will need to be informed. They may accelerate plans for official contact. With Earth authorities, Susan felt a weight settle on her shoulders. So by helping you, I've potentially changed the course of human history. The journey to Kalia took 3 Earth days. During that time, Susan learned more about the Navari than any human before her. Liani served as her constant companion, explaining their culture, technology, and history. The ship, called the Tide Seeker, moved through space using what Liani called fold technology. They didn't travel through space so much as fold it, bringing distant points temporarily closer. It's like creating a tunnel between 2 places, Liani explained as they sat in the observation deck, watching stars streak by. Each fold can only be maintained briefly and require significant energy. Susan was fascinated by everything. The ship itself seemed partly alive with systems that responded to touch and thought. The crew, numbering 20, in total treated her with curious respect. Many had studied Earth from afar, but none had met a human. Commander Alea spent several hours each day briefing Susan on what to expect when they reached Kalia. The Navari homeworld was governed by a council of elders who would want to interview her. The assembly, a coalition of spacefaring civilizations, would also send representatives once they learned of her presence. You will be the first human to officially meet representatives of other worlds, Alea explained. This is a great responsibility. Susan felt the weight of that responsibility growing heavier each day. She was just a woman who had chosen to live alone in the woods, hardly a diplomat. Yet circumstances had thrust her into a historic role. Why? Me, she asked Liani during a quiet moment. Am nobody special. Liani tilted her head, her silver hair catching the light. You faced 3 armed collectors with only a primitive weapon to protect someone not of your kind. That is extraordinary by any standard, but anyone would have done the same. Susan protested. No, Liani said firmly. Most beings would not. She touched the crystal that Susan now wore on a cord around her neck. This recorded your actions, your courage, your willingness to risk yourself for another. Many species claim such nobility. Few demonstrated. On the final day of their journey, Susan was invited to the bridge. The curved view screen showed a blue-green planet ahead surrounded by what looked like rings, but Liani explained were actually floating cities connected by transport tubes. Kalia, Susan whispered. The sight was breathtaking. The planet was mostly ocean with scattered island chains. The cities in orbit glowed with gentle light, their designs flowing and organic like massive artistic sculptures. Commander Alea stood beside her. Welcome to our homeworld, she said. The first human to see it with her own eyes. The ship docked at one of the orbital cities called Lumina. According to Liani, it served as the diplomatic center where off-worlders were received. Susan was provided with quarters that had been quickly adapted for human needs, though some aspects of Navari design took getting used to. The bed, for instance, seemed to float without support and adjusted its firmness to her body automatically. The lighting responded to her thoughts, dimming or brightening as needed. That evening, a delegation arrived to welcome her formally. The leader, an elder Navari named Talia, whose skin had faded to a pale silver. Blue with age, presented her with ceremonial clothing. These garments are made from aquasilk, she explained, our most prized fabric. It adjusts to your body temperature and never soils. Susan thanked her awkwardly, still struggling with the formal speech. Patterns the Navari used in official settings. Do not concern yourself with formality. Talia said kindly, your presence here is unprecedented. We are learning how to welcome you, just as you are learning our ways. The following day, Susan attended her first council meeting. The chamber was a vast circular room with walls that appeared to be made of flowing water somehow held in place. The 13 council members sat in a semicircle, their ceremonial robes shimmering with patterns that seemed to move like currents. Susan stood in the center with Liani beside her, though Liani had explained that her role was now observer, rather than participant elder. Moren, the head of the council, spoke first. Human, Susan, we welcome you to Kalia. Never before has one of your kind stood before this council. Your presence marks a significant moment in our shared history. Susan had prepared a simple speech with Liana's help, thanking them for their hospitality and expressing hope for friendship between their worlds. The council listened attentively. When she finished, Elder Morin nodded. We have observed Earth for many centuries. We have watched your kind develop technology, build civilizations, destroy them, and build again. You are a species of great contradiction, great capacity for both creation and destruction. This paradox has led to much debate within the assembly. Another council member spoke. This unexpected encounter presents both opportunity and challenge. The collectors now know of Navari presence. On Earth, they will spread this information. Our policy of non-interference may need revision. Susan realized they were discussing the fate of Earth. How strange that the actions of one human in a cabin in Montana might affect billions of lives. The debate continued for hours with council members presenting various viewpoints. Some argued for accelerating contact with Earth authorities. Others favored maintaining distance, believing humans were not ready for the knowledge of other civilizations. Susan listened, feeling increasingly frustrated. Finally, she asked to speak. The council may forget that I am here. She said, I am not a diplomat or a scientist, just an ordinary human. But I believe my people deserve the truth. We may be divided, but we are not children. We face our own challenges. Climate change, resource depletion, social inequality, but we face them. We try. We may fail often, but we keep trying. The chamber fell silent. Susan continued, I understand your caution, but hiding truth rarely leads to wisdom on my world. My people will face whatever comes, whether you're part of it or not. Elder Morin studied her. Your words show passion and conviction qualities. The Navari respect. He turned to the council. This human has demonstrated courage and wisdom. Perhaps she is evidence that Earth is more ready than we believed. After the council session, Liani took Susan to see more of Lumina. The city was a marvel of organic architecture. Buildings flowed into one another with no sharp edges or corners. Water was everywhere in channels, pools, and falls that seemed to defy gravity. Plants grew throughout the city, many with bioluminescent properties that provided soft lighting. The Navari they passed regarded Susan with open curiosity. Some approached asking respectful questions about Earth and human life. Susan did her best to answer, realizing how difficult it was to speak for all humanity. That evening they dined with Commander Ilea and several scientists who were particularly interested in human biology. The meal consisted of foods grown in hydroponic gardens, flavors that were familiar yet strange. The scientists explained that they had studied Earth agriculture and attempted to recreate some plants that might appeal to human taste. We have been preparing for eventual contact, Ilea explained, though we did not expect it to happen quite this way. Susan asked about the assembly and learned that representatives would arrive within days. The assembly included 12 major species and numerous associate members. It maintained peace, monitored developing worlds, and regulated trade and travel between civilizations. Some members are quite different from either Navari or humans. Liani explained, you may find them unusual, but all are sentient beings worthy of respect. Susan wondered how she would react to truly alien life forms. The Navari at least had a humanoid shape. However, Liani described species with multiple limbs or none at all, beings of living crystal or gas species, that communicated through color or scent rather than sound. Later that night, unable to sleep, Susan stood at the window of her quarters, looking out at the stars and the curve of Kalia below. Everything felt dreamlike. The quiet woman who had chosen isolation on Earth now found herself an impromptu ambassador to the stars. A soft chime indicated someone at her door. It was Liani. "I sensed you were awake," she said. "Our crystals are connected now." She touched her own crystal, which glowed with the same pulse as the one around Susan's neck. Susan invited her in, grateful for the company. "I keep thinking, I'll wake up back in my cabin," she admitted. "And all this will have been a dream." "Not a dream," Liani said. "A new reality." She joined Susan at the window. "Tomorrow the Assembly representatives arrive. They will decide much about Earth's future." "Will they punish Earth because of what happened?" Susan asked. "Because of me." Liani shook her head. "The Assembly does not punish. They assess. They determine readiness for contact. They protect developing worlds sometimes from themselves, but they also recognize sovereignty." Susan turned to her. "Tell me truthfully, what do you think will happen?" Liani considered her answer. "The Assembly will likely accelerate plans for official contact with Earth. They will approach your world leaders not with demands but with invitation. Earth will be offered observer status within the Assembly, a first step toward full membership. And collectors," Susan asked, "will they come to Earth?" "Undoubtedly," Liani said. "But the Assembly will provide protection technology to detect and defend against unauthorized ships. They already do this for many threshold worlds." Susan sat on the edge of the floating bed. "Our world is so divided. Will we even be able to agree on how to respond to contact?" Liani smiled softly. "That is why contact is approached gradually. First through selected representatives, then broader announcement, preparation time for adjustment. The Assembly has overseen this process many times. They understand the shock, cultural impact. They proceed with care." The Grand Chamber made the council room look small by comparison. Its ceiling arched hundreds of feet overhead, appearing to be open to space. Though Liani explained it was an advanced holographic projection, the floor was a mosaic depicting the known galaxy with Kalia, highlighted in luminescent blue. Assembly representatives stood in small groups throughout the chamber. Susan had to force herself not to stare. Some appeared nearly human, except for coloration or slight differences in proportion. Others were profoundly alien. A group of crystalline beings stood near one wall, their faceted bodies refracting light into rainbow patterns. Another delegate appeared to be a floating cloud of purple gas contained within a transparent sphere. Liani whispered names as they passed Tarathi from the crystal worlds of Zareth Vox, collective consciousness in gaseous form, Solarians beings of pure energy, Drell amphibious sentience. With 4 arms, Susan struggled to process it all. The sheer diversity of life, the knowledge that humanity was just one small part of a vast tapestry of civilizations. It was humbling and exhilarating. Elder Morin approached with a tall being whose skin was deep crimson with gold markings along the temples. "May I present Arbiter Zan of the Assembly High Council. The Arbiter will oversee today's proceedings." The crimson being inclined its head in greeting. "Your presence here is unexpected, human, but not unwelcome." The voice was melodic with an accent that somehow reminded Susan of wind through trees. "Thank you." Susan responded, uncertain of proper protocol but determined to remain composed. The proceedings began with formal introductions of each delegation. Liani remained at Susan's side, translating nuances that the translator devices might miss. The room contained representatives from 28 different species, though Liani explained that the Assembly included many more who had not sent delegates on such short notice. Elder Morin presented a detailed account of recent events, beginning with Liana's crash on Earth and ending with the confrontation with collectors and Susan's subsequent journey to Kalia. As he spoke, Susan realized how significant these events were considered. The full attention of beings from across the galaxy focused on what had seemed at the time like a simple choice to help someone in need. When Elder Morin finished Arbiter, Zan addressed the chamber. This incident raises important questions. The policy of non-interference with threshold worlds must be reconsidered in light of collector activity. Evidence suggests they have established a presence near Earth contrary to assembly directives, a delegate that resembled a tall insectoid being stepped forward. Collectors operate outside our jurisdiction. We cannot monitor all frontier regions, Arbiter. Zan nodded. This is true. However, we can protect worlds that have been targeted, especially those approaching threshold status. Susan listened as the delegates debated. Earth Protection Observer status, timelines for contact. It was surreal to hear her world discussed as if it were a case study. She wondered what world leaders would make of all this. The knowledge that Earth had been observed for centuries, that humanity was considered a developing species under protection. Eventually, Arbiter Zan turned to her human Susan. You have remained silent during our deliberations, yet you are central to these events. We would hear your thoughts. Susan hadn't expected to be asked to speak. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. I understand him. In a strange position, she began. I can't speak for all humans or all Earth governments. I'm just one person who made a choice to help someone in need. She glanced at Liani. But that choice has created this situation, so I feel responsible. She continued. My world has many problems. We fight wars over resources, religion, territory. We damage our environment. We struggle with inequality. But we also create art, music, literature. We explore our solar system. We dream of the stars. She gestured around the chamber. Many of you have watched us for centuries. You know our flaws and our strengths better than I could describe. From what I've learned, the assembly values diversity, cooperation, mutual respect. These are values many humans share. We may not always live up to them, but we strive toward them. Susan paused, looking around at the assembled delegates. If collectors are targeting Earth as you believe, then keeping us ignorant doesn't protect us. It makes us vulnerable. Knowledge. Even difficult knowledge gives us a chance to prepare to make choices. The chamber remained silent as she finished. Arbiter Zan studied her with eyes that seemed to see beyond the surface. You speak with wisdom, human. The Arbiter War turned to address the assembly. I propose an acceleration of contact protocols for Earth, beginning with a delegation to meet with a selected group of Earth leaders. Following established procedures for threshold worlds, the proposal generated intense discussion. Some delegates advocated for immediate broad contact, others for continued observation. A representative of the Solarians argued that human development should proceed naturally without interference. Susan listened to it all, wondering how she had become part of such a momentous decision. How strange that her simple life had led to this moment. The debate continued for hours. Finally, a consensus emerged. Earth would receive protected status. A delegation would make contact with a small group of world leaders, scientists, and cultural representatives initially. A period of preparation would follow before a wider announcement to Earth's population. Technology would be shared gradually, beginning with defensive systems to detect and repel unauthorized ships like those of the collectors. Throughout the proceedings, Susan noticed a delegate watching her more intently than the others. The being was tall and slender, with pale skin that seemed almost translucent. Liani identified them as Fayan, an ancient species known for their abilities in prediction and analysis. When the formal session ended, the Vayan approached. I would speak with the human. They said, their voice like distant bells. Arbiter Zan nodded and introduced the being as Oracle Elia, chief analyst for the Assembly Oracle. Elia led Susan to a quiet alcove away from the other delegates. You have catalyzed significant change, human. The Oracle studied her with eyes that shifted color like opals. Your presence here was not predicted in any of our models. Yet now that you are here, I see patterns forming around you. What does that mean? Susan asked. The Oracle gestured and a holographic display appeared between them, showing lines of light branching and converging timelines, possibilities. The Oracle explained. Some beings can perceive them to varying degrees. Humans occasionally demonstrate rudimentary versions of this perception. You call it intuition. The display showed Earth represented as a blue sphere. Various lines extended from it, most fading after short distances, but one glowed brighter than the others, extending far into the projection. "This path, Oracle," Elia said, pointing to the bright line. "This becomes more probable with your involvement." "What path is it?" Susan asked. "One where Earth joins the assembly, not merely as a member, but as a bridge between old and new civilizations." The Oracle looked at her. "Your species possesses unusual adaptability, creativity. You solve problems differently than the older races. It is why you have been watched with such interest." Susan frowned. "I don't understand. What makes humans different?" "Most spacefaring races evolved, slowly developing technology over thousands or millions of years," the Oracle explained, "achieving balance with their environments before reaching to the stars. Humans compressed this development into mere centuries. Your minds work differently, more flexible, more intuitive. You make cognitive leaps that other species find remarkable. Sometimes dangerous, but often brilliant," the Oracle continued. "You demonstrated this when you faced collectors, outnumbered, outmatched technologically, yet you adapted instantly, using what you had available, without hesitation, without lengthy analysis of probability. That quality is rare in the galaxy and valuable, so humans are impulsive," Susan said with a slight smile. The Oracle made a gesture that might have been amusement. "Yes, but also innovative. The assembly has existed for 50,000 years. Change comes. Slowly traditions calcify. Some believe new perspectives are needed. The lines converge on a future where humanity helps create this change." Susan shook her head. "I'm just one person. I didn't ask for any of this. You chose," the Oracle corrected. "When you stood between collectors and Liani, you chose a path without knowing where it led. That choice ripples outward, changing more than you can see." When Susan returned to the main chamber, she found Liani in conversation with Commander Alea. They turned. As she approached, "The assembly has reached its decision," Alea announced. "A delegation will travel to Earth in 7 standard days. You are invited to return with them as a liaison." Susan felt a mixture of relief and trepidation. How would Earth react? Would she be welcomed as a hero or vilified for her role? Liani seemed to sense her concern. "The initial contact will be handled with great care," she assured her. "Only a small group will be informed at first. Time will be allowed for adjustment before wider announcement." That evening, a celebration was held in one of Lumina's vast gardens. Susan met delegates from dozens of worlds, each curious about the human who had disrupted centuries of careful observation. She tried to answer their questions as honestly as possible, though many seemed interested in the strangest things. Human music, food customs, mating rituals. One delegate, a Tarathi crystal being, was particularly fascinated by Susan's hair, asking permission to touch it. The sensation was odd, like gentle electricity, but not unpleasant. "Your species has such varied covering," the Tarathi observed. "Our kind are born as we will remain." The 7 days passed in a blur of preparation. Susan received intensive briefings on protocol, diplomatic procedures, and the complex structure of the assembly. She was fitted with an advanced translator device that would allow communication without Liani present, though her friend would remain at her side throughout the process. Oracle Elia met with her daily, providing insight into probable reactions from Earth authorities and suggestions for addressing concerns. The Vians seemed increasingly convinced that Susan's role was pivotal, though Susan herself remained skeptical. "I was just in the right place at the right time," she insisted during one session. "Nothing special about me." The Oracle made the gesture Susan now recognized as amusement. "You underestimate the significance of choice. Human Susan, many were in position to affect events. Few would have acted as you did. The delegation that would travel to Earth consisted of representatives from 5 species, chosen carefully for their similarity to human physiology. The Navari would lead with Liani as primary contact. The others included a Solarian, an Arax, a Tarathi, and Oracle Elia. representing the Vion. Their ship would be escorted by 3 Navari vessels equipped with technology to remain undetected by Earth sensors until they chose to reveal themselves. The night before their departure, a formal ceremony was held. The Navari Council presented Susan with gifts to take back to Earth, including data crystals containing cultural and scientific knowledge carefully selected not to overwhelm or disrupt human development. Elder Morin addressed her formally. "Human Susan, you return to your world bearing knowledge that will forever change its course. We entrust this responsibility to you because you have demonstrated wisdom, courage, and compassion qualities the Navari and the Assembly value. We believe Earth will find its place among the stars guided by individuals like yourself." Susan accepted the gifts with appropriate formality, feeling both honored and terrified. The weight of responsibility seemed to grow with each passing hour. When the ceremony ended, she retreated to her quarters to pack the few belongings she had brought from Earth and the gifts she had received. Looking at her reflection in the mirror, she hardly recognized herself. The woman who had sought solitude in the Montana woods seemed like a stranger. The person who looked back at her now stood straighter with confidence born of extraordinary experience. Soft chime announced a visitor. It was Oracle Elia. The Vion entered gliding rather than walking, their feet barely touching the floor. "I bring a personal gift," the Oracle said, extending a small crystalline object. It was not appropriate to present this publicly. Susan accepted it curiously. The object was a cube small enough to fit in her palm. Unlike the data crystals, this one was opaque with a swirling mist inside. "What is it?" she asked. "Possibility viewer," the Oracle explained. "It shows potential, futures based on choice. When faced with difficult decisions, it may offer clarity. Not certainty, never that. But insight." Susan studied the cube. "How does it work?" "Hold it in both hands. Focus on a question or choice." The Oracle demonstrated the position. "Images will form, not always clear. They require interpretation, but they are drawn from probability threads." Susan thanked the Oracle, uncertain if she would ever use such a device, but touched by the gesture. The Vion studied her for a moment. "Before I leave, I must tell you something." The Oracle seemed hesitant, unusual for the normally composed being. "The contact with Earth. It will not proceed as smoothly as the Assembly hopes. There will be resistance, fear, even violence." Susan felt her stomach tighten. "Why tell me this now?" "Because you must be prepared." The Oracle replied, "Your role will be greater than anyone anticipates. Even I cannot see all paths clearly, but I see you at many crossroads, many decision points, each choice rippling outward, affecting millions." "How am I supposed to handle that?" Susan whispered. The Oracle touched her shoulder gently, "As you have handled everything else. One moment at a time. Trust your instincts, human Susan. They have guided you well so far." After the Oracle left, Susan sat on the edge of her bed holding the possibility viewer. She considered asking it to show her what lay ahead, then set it carefully in her bag. Some things perhaps were better faced without foreknowledge. The journey back to Earth took 3 days. The diplomatic vessel, Harmony, was larger and more comfortable than the Tideseeker. The representatives used the time to finalize contact protocols and prepare for various scenarios. Susan was surprised to learn they would not approach the United Nations or any single world government as she had expected. Instead, they would make contact with a carefully selected group of 12 individuals from around the world. Scientists, cultural leaders, philosophers chosen for their open-mindedness and influence. "We have studied your world extensively," Arbiter Zan explained. "Your political structures are not yet unified enough for direct governmental contact. This approach has proven more effective with threshold worlds. Prepare the soil before planting the seed." The initial meeting would take place at a remote location in Norway, a research facility chosen for its privacy and security. Earth authorities would be given only enough information to ensure the selected representatives attended. No mention of extraterrestrial contact would be made until they arrived. Susan would arrive first to prepare them a familiar human face to help bridge the gap between worlds. The delegation would remain in orbit until she signaled they were ready as. Earth grew larger in the view screen. Susan felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief at returning home, anxiety about what lay ahead, pride at being part of something so momentous, and underneath it all a strange sense of loss. Callia, with its floating cities and 3 moons, had begun to feel like a second home. Liani joined her at the viewport. "You seem troubled." Susan smiled wryly. "Just wondering how you explain to 12 strangers that everything they thought they knew about humanity's place in the universe is about to change, and then convince them to help the rest of the world accept it." Liani touched her arm gently. "You will find the words." The crystal at her throat pulsed in rhythm with the one Susan wore. The harmony entered Earth orbit, positioning itself above the Arctic Circle where it would remain undetected. Susan would travel to the surface in a smaller craft, designed to register as a private jet on Earth. Sensors Commander Ilea provided her with communication devices and emergency protocols. "If anything goes wrong, activate this," she said, handing Susan what appeared to be an ordinary bracelet. "It will alert us immediately." The 12 individuals summoned to the Norway facility had been told only that they were attending a breakthrough scientific presentation. Their governments had agreed, based on the credentials of the organization supposedly hosting the event, a respected international research foundation that was actually an assembly front established years earlier for eventual contact. Susan studied their profiles during the final descent: a quantum physicist from Japan, a philosopher from Kenya, a cultural anthropologist from Brazil, a religious scholar from India, others from across the globe representing diverse perspectives and fields of expertise. The landing craft touched down at a small private airfield, where a vehicle waited to take Susan to the facility. It felt strange to be back on Earth. The air, the gravity, the sunlight, all familiar, yet somehow different now. She had left Earth as an ordinary woman. She returned as something else. A bridge between worlds. The facility overlooking a fjord was modern and comfortable. The 12 representatives had arrived throughout the day and were gathering for dinner when Susan entered the conference room. They looked up curiously as she was introduced as the project's coordinator. She spent the evening getting to know them, answering their questions, vaguely preparing herself for the following day when everything would change. She studied their interactions, noting who seemed more open, who more skeptical, who formed alliances. She would need all of them on board. That night, she stood on the balcony of her room looking up at the stars, knowing the Harmony orbited somewhere above, waiting for her signal. She touched the crystal at her throat, feeling its gentle pulse. The connection to Liani gave her strength. Morning came too quickly. Susan dressed carefully in the clothing provided by the Navari, specially designed to appear as normal Earth fashion, while incorporating subtle elements of assembly formal wear. She activated her communication device, a small earpiece that would allow Liani to advise her throughout the presentation. The 12 representatives gathered in the conference room, their expressions ranging from curious to impatient. Susan took a deep breath and stepped to the podium. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "I know you were told this was about a scientific breakthrough. That wasn't exactly accurate." She paused, looking at each face. "What I'm about to tell you will change everything you thought you knew about our place in the universe, and I need you to listen with open minds." She told them everything, beginning with finding Liani in her cabin, through her journey to Callia, her meetings with the assembly, the decision to initiate contact. She showed them the crystal she wore, explaining its significance. She displayed some of the gifts she had brought back: technology and knowledge in small measured doses. At first there was disbelief, then shock. Questions came rapidly, some skeptical, some afraid, some excited. Susan answered as honestly as she could, explaining that the delegation waited in orbit ready to meet them, if they were willing.